How's it going there, everybody? My name is Samuel Fisher with Green Dispensary Marketing with the GDM podcast. As you know, always trying to be talking with the best entrepreneurs, the best people in the space, some of the movers and shakers in the space, and also innovators in the space. And really excited today because I'm talking with one of the biggest innovators in the space right now. He's actually doing what he calls autonomous cannabis commerce. He's the founder of BakeBot AI. This is a Chicago-based tech company that's changing how AI integrates with dispensaries. And so he's actually has developed what he calls an AI agent budtender, which it connects to your POS, connects to your website, makes it so you increase your customer cart sizes, increase those sales. And so I'm really excited to talk with him and just learn some new ways, fresh ways to get marketing ROIs. His name is Martez Knox, and he's the founder and CEO of BakeBot AI. How are you doing today, Martez?
Great. I'm great. Thank you for having me, Samuel. Great to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Also super excited to learn some things from you. I'm sure you have some new ideas, new cool tricks, and things that you could share with us to kind of educate not only my audience, your audience, but also the broader industry. But let's start at the beginning. I'm interested in learning more about you personally. So, can you tell me a little bit about your background, how you got here, who you are, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in marketing in one form or another for over 20 years right now. It sounds funny to even say that, right? I'm giving away my age there. But needless to say, I've been around the block. Before I launched Baked by AI, I was running marketing for an education technology firm, my footpath. Had a lot of fun there, but really took a look at the cannabis industry because of an experience I had with a bud tender, and really thought, you know what, we can better equip the bud tenders to answer some of these questions instead of them being on an island, right, where they're kind of, guessing, right? So our goal is to bring data into that process so that bud tenders not only become smarter, right, but the online aspect when engaging with your customers, right? We want to improve that experience.
Yeah, and so I think it's actually a really right off the jump there. You're talking about the bud tenders. Myself personally, when I'm going into a dispensary and buying, the bud tenders are often the ones that convince me to buy new products, and oftentimes they're also the ones that get me to come back. But I'm curious. A lot of people talk shit about AI. It hallucinates. It's full of shit. What would you say to those people? How does it work? Do you like have like data that you train it on? How do you make sure that it recommends the right thing? Because what's the difference between a bud tender that talks shit and the AI bud tender that talks shit? What would you say?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, I want to posit that it's still very early, right? Much like 1999 at the beginning of the internet, right? A lot of this tech is still developing out, and it's developing out rapidly, much faster than, say, the early internet, right? In fact, I would say it's probably 10x, right? Every 6 months, basically, we're doing something new and exciting. Now, with that being said, one of the ways that we have used to help our bud tender understand data, right, is we've trained Smokey on, strain data, terpenes, cannabinoids, right, fillings, effects, right, that, the entourage effect when these two, when terpenes, when they interact with each other. And what we've sought to do is take that based on your past purchase history, right, flowers that you have liked, right, we want to combine those and sort of use that to recommend a strain to you. Now that's on the customer side. Now when it comes to the dispensary and the operational side, one thing, depending on what your goals are as a dispensary or as a brand, right, we want to be able to help you maintain margins, right, but also help your customers find strains that they like, right? But again, those things don't have to be sort of at odds with each other, right? Being able to maintain margins and help the customer find, a quality product, right? One thing that we know is that if the customer is satisfied, right, they typically come back, right? If
Yeah.
I visit your dispensary and I have a bad experience because, bud tender recommended me something that really didn't resonate, depending on where you are in the whole situation, I may not come back again, right? So you have a lot of folks that have visited the dispensary one time, right, and never came back, right? They went somewhere else and decided, okay, I feel better here. What we want to do is go after those folks that visit that 1-2 times, right, and figure out how to retain those customers, right, and add them into the customer journey, right, and boost that lifetime value overall.
Yeah, so it sounds like you do two things here. You know, you kind of help with the, shall we say, onboarding or acquisition of new customers. You know, somebody goes to the website, and then all of a sudden, there's like, well, what the hell do I do? Oh, what's this cool little button over here? And then all of a sudden, they're talking and being recommended products. And then you mentioned retention, and so I'm curious, how does that work? How do you help connect with retention?
Yeah. So one thing that we know is that if you can get a customer to shop 5 to 7 times, right, the likelihood of you retaining that customer, for years, right, 12, 24, 36 months, right, it goes up exponentially. Right. So a lot of our marketing, especially with our beta partners, a lot of our early marketing is focused on like how can we get to that 5 to 7 touch point, right, where we know that once customer engages with us across email, SMS, in person, right, these are all touch points, right. Once they engage with us that many times, we know that the customer lifetime value of that customer goes up, right, and this allows us to not focus on sending just discounts, right, to try to retain the customer, right. So what you want to do is organically try to retain the customer initially, and not have it be based on just solely discounts, right. So
Yeah.
same way you came in, right, is the same way you go out, right. So if I, as a customer, if you use discounts to get me in the door, right, you'll probably have to do that, right, over the life.
Over and over.
What we want to focus on is more so, okay, what differentiates your brand, right? Are you like our early partner, California Cannabis? Are you you have product grown in living soil, right? Are you growing in Humboldt County, right? All these different differentiating factors that don't necessarily involve price as the sole mechanism to move foot traffic, right? And I think that's kind of how we're training our agents and how we're thinking about it just overall. That, and then a sort of bottom up understanding of your customer, right? So what kind of customer are you reaching, right? Are you reaching high spending smokers that like quality? Are you in a situation where you're dealing with a lot of college kids where quality isn't the driving motivating factor? Maybe it is discounts, right? We want to help them better understand their customer to better inform that marketing overall.
Yeah, so let's go into the hood of that a little bit because that's really interesting. And so on one hand, one of my favorite retention influencers, Steph Rona, shout out. She hates discounts, and she thinks it's like the worst way to get more sales in the door because it's basically just training your customers is not to come back unless you have a really good deal. But then at the same time, you brought this up. It's like, what about the college students who are just broke? They're working 40 hours, or it's not working, but studying 40 hours a week. Then they have exams and all that shit. Do you find that there's a better way to upsell, and how does that work with BakeBot?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a better way. So the core of our tool is our growth engine. And what that does is, once you pull that dispensary data in, we segment the customers, right? So we seek to understand who's the, high spender, frequent shopper, who's a low spender, infrequent shopper, who's the low spender, frequent shopper, right? And married to some demographic data, right? Now we better understand, okay, this is likely 22, 23-year-old, right? Kind of earlier in their life path. Premium might not be exactly what they're looking for, right? But what we seek to do is kind of segment those customers. So let's say you have a customer list of 5,000, right? What we'll do is we'll help you understand, okay, who are those college students and what messaging should they be getting? Who are those folks that come in and they spend on premium products and they don't really care about, the discount aspect of it, right? That can actually help you maintain your margins, right? Those customers should not be receiving the same customers as the college kids, right?
Absolutely.
And to the extent that dispensaries and cannabis brands are sending that same message out to all 5,000 customers, I posit that that's a fail, right? That's not a recipe for keeping customers engaged and getting foot traffic. That's a recipe for me ignoring your messages, right? Because I look at it and I'm like, okay, I really don't personally myself. Discounts, I'm okay with them, right? Like I will, but I also, especially when I'm traveling, I really like premium products. Like I like to explore and see, okay, what's the best brand you got, right? Okay, oh, this is how this compares to, you know, some of the brands out of Chicago, right? Corner Boys or some of the other folks. I like to compare, right? So when you don't account for where people are, you know, at the buyer's journey, right? I think that you missed the point of it overall, right? Because when I was, you know, 21, 22, 23, 24, I did things that, you know, 21 and 23-year-olds do, right? As a 44-year-old man, right? A lot of that stuff I just won't do, right? And that goes across buying patterns, right? It's just universal in that way, right? It's not like all of a sudden when it comes to cannabis, I at 44, now I need, like, give me the cheapest thing you got, buddy. I just want to get high.
I mean, I bet there's people that do fit into there, but, you know, generally a 44-year-old is not going to be looking for the cheapest.
But our goal, right, to the extent that there is a 44-year-old guy who just wants discounts, right, which, again, there's a place for that. We want to understand that and use data, right, and then deliver messages across the customer journey that resonate with even that person, right? That there's nothing that says, like, okay, just because you're 22, you have to be, you know, looking for the cheapest thing, right? What we look at is, what does the data say, right? And then if the data is telling us that, then we'll use that to kind of predict and recommend.
Yeah, well, hell yeah, Martez. This is really cool, really fascinating stuff. So let's go a little bit deeper on the hood here. So, you know, just looking at the small amount of research that I had before hopping into this call, notice that we got 3 products here. We got Craig, Debo, and Pops. Can you break those down? Because I know you mentioned Smokey too. So there's 4 total. Can you break down how those work, just so I understand exactly what's going on here?
Yeah, so I think it's best to actually look at it in context. So we have 3 sort of core products, right? We have our AI agent budtender, which we've been discussing. We have our Headless menu, which allows dispensaries and cannabis brands even to display their products, allow folks to check out. And then we have our suite of AI agents. And our AI agents is what powers, you know, our growth engine, right? So you talked about Smokey. Smokey is a budtender responsible for customer engagement, specifically, you know, front end facing customer engagement on your website. Debo is responsible for compliance. And what these agents do is they work together to sort of deliver campaigns and make sure that you deliver messages compliantly. So while Smokey may end up generating the message, Debo will go in and verify that it's in compliance with whatever state that you're in before it actually goes out. So I know that a lot of folks are concerned about, well, how do you stop hallucinations? And, you know, what kind of safeguards do you have in place to do that? Right. So, again, we have an agent whose only task is to check and make sure that the messaging conforms, right? And not only that it conforms, but it matches what we've trained it on, right? And, you know, over right now, we're in the thousands of messages, right? And you know, we're working to further test this, right? But we feel confident enough to say, okay, come on into the beta, join, and let's send more messages, right? And further optimize this. For our customers, the more messages that we are able to send, the more we can train our tools, the better the messaging gets, right? So, for example, if we have a specific messaging or something that's working in California with a certain demographic of customers, right? And we see that somewhere in Maryland it has a similar demographic, the system is smart enough to kind of test the waters, right? And A/B test that messaging. So when it, you know, all said and done, we have all these different agents that work together, right, to deliver autonomous cannabis commerce campaigns, right? Where literally the human just imports the data, you push the button, then the automations run.
Yeah, hell yeah. And so you used one word or 2 words in there that really struck my attention. You used the headless menu. And so how does that work? So essentially when you're in the chat, it'll show the product and the checkout button right there. How does that work?
Yeah, so, well, you can check out using our AI agent budtender as well. But what we have is an actual menu, right? So something, one of the stats that often gets thrown around is like 80% of dispensary menus are based on iframes, right?
Yep.
And just that, you know, I don't know how educated your audience is on iframes, but an iframe is basically like a website within a website, right? Yep. The problem with that is when Bing comes to crawl your website, right? They're crawling the source domain of those products and not your domain. Why does this matter, right? It means that when people search, they're not searching to find your website. They're searching to find, whatever iframe provider you have, right? So imagine when I got into the industry and I see people are paying $1,000 for this menu, $500 for this menu, right? Totally right. Don't get mad at me, guys. I'm just keeping it real, but totally right for disruption, right? Not only does this solution cost dispensaries money, right? Because if your product isn't, I just put something up on my Instagram today, and I said, I'm pretty sure if your products are invisible to Google, that's costing you money, right? Now, as a dispensary owner, cannabis brand, you may not look at it like that, right? But in reality, of dispensaries, or if you're, the customers of dispensaries, if they're unable to find you online, or if they end up on some marketplace, a la, Weed Maps, Leafly, etc., that's not good for you, right? That's good for Leafly, right? That's good for Weed Maps. So one of the things that we want to do is give folks back their own data, right? When you install our Headless menu on your website, they stay on your website. It crawls your own website. It doesn't take them to some weird subdomain and, try to pretend and pass it off and make it look normal, right? It's actually your website, right? And this is what a Headless menu provides.
Yeah, that is so badass because this is like, my pitches on LinkedIn and my emails and cold outreach for like the past 2 years have just been essentially what you just said, man. So thank you. Just preaching to the choir here, man. Iframes, they're the devil. Don't do them.
Yeah.
Have
Get
your
out
own
of bed
menu.
with that iframe.
And stop giving your data to platforms like Weed Maps and Leafly. They can bring people in the door, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have access to the customer data and the database.
Yeah, you should be able to own, and I want to make absolutely clear, when you come and do business with us, if you decide to go your own way or go back to Dutchy, Weedman, whoever you use, you take your data with you, right? We don't do any weird silo and you got to pay us to take your data. It's okay, right? We don't want to we want to come into this industry and be more of a light, right?
Yeah,
There's already enough silo and data, so yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry for cutting you off, but I'm curious, who does this work for? Are you going after like the MSOs? Are you going after the mom and pops? Who have you had the most success with? Who does this best integrate with?
Yeah, so right now it's been interesting. We have some early dispensary partners, but brands have been gravitating towards our tools. And actually one of our early go-to-market partners, Melanie's Static Edibles, is a brand. And what we've essentially allowed brands to do is operate similarly to a dispensary, right? So you can display your own products on your own website. And when it's time to check out, we can direct your customers to the nearest dispensary to pick up, right? So what does this do, right? Number one, that leaky funnel, this helps with that, right? When customers come to you and you're like, okay, where can I get your products? I, as a brand, now I have to tell you, you can go to dispensary 33 or you can go to whatever dispensary and pick it up. However, when you get there, guess what? Now we have a budtender that's probably going to also recommend something else, right? And you may end up with that product or with your product or not. What we aim to do is keep the customer within your funnel so they check out on your own website. And depending on the relationship we have with the dispensary, we're even able to offer checkout, right? So imagine that I, as a cannabis brand, I can sell directly. I can have first party data, right? Indirectly, I should say, but I can have first party data on my customers, right? I have emails, I have SMS, I have name, I have birth date, I have all the things that I need to retain them as a customer of my brand, right? Outside of the sort of dispensary silo, right? So what we're finding is, this is where they're gravitating to. And we're looking forward to rolling this out with our next partner, 40 Tons brand, and sort of expanding this path that we're going on. To be honest, Samuel, we built for our customers. We didn't try to take a top-down approach and say, hey, what do you guys need, right? We've invited our partners onto the platform. We said, hey, how can we make this better, right? So a lot of the brand stuff It's from Anthony and with 40 tons, right? We work together to sort of iterate and see what this looks like, and what they would need, right? How can AI agents help them? So shout out to 40 tons, Anthony and the whole Lori, whole crew. Yeah, certainly appreciate them.
So wow, man, there's a lot to unpack there. I think you are in a new market that I think you're also offering something that at least I haven't seen offered yet. So, you have competitors. You have people who have, for example, trademarked AI bud tender. What's the word? I forget. But here's the thing. This is a trend that many people have noticed. Is that a lot of people, a lot of customers, they're more faithful to the brand, like whether it be Wild Gummies or, at 42 Tons or what was is that the brand? More so than the actual dispensary. And so what I've seen, the old way of doing this is the brands, they have their own little website and they have like a retail locator. It's like, here's where we're located, but it doesn't say anything about products. And so essentially what you're doing here is you're bridging the gap. You're making it not only easy to find where the products are located, but what specific products, and maybe even also checking out on the same platform. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, to be fair, there are some engineering challenges that we're, had to overcome even initially to get this far. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. Giving the ability for them to go to the cannabis brand's website, add a product to the cart, right, and then check out and then pick it up, at the nearest dispensary. Yeah.
This is a pretty badass. What other big objections are you noticing? Obviously we're getting like the AI's it'll hallucinate. What are some other big objections that you kind of notice in your sales process for AI and your tool?
Yeah. So beyond the hallucination stuff, which I don't get often, I've had situations where I was at an event and I sat down at a table to talk to some bud tenders in the industry. One of them just flat out refused to take my card, right? So I think that bud tenders are
It's just
sort
a
of
card.
learning. Yeah, it's just a card, right? The stickers. But it was odd because everybody else, the other 5 folks at the table, it's like, whoa, this sounds cool, right? But then once I kind of explained to them and made them understand that, look, this is not something that's going to replace a bud tender. No, not at all. Where we want the customers to come in, informed, possibly with a recommendation, right, already, or maybe some sort of recommendation. And then on the other side of that, we want to be able to give the bud tender insight into, what these customers usually buy, right? Whether they have a predisposition towards, right? Do they like myrcene, right? Do they like, this cannabinoid? Do they like this terpene, right? And then the bud tender using that data, right, would be able to further enhance it, right? So the way that we see bud tenders is not only, should they be responsible for recommending strains, right, but these are your frontline community builders, right? So if we are able to, let's say the average time with a bud tender is 3, 4, 5 minutes, right? If out of that 5 minutes, right, we're able to focus 2 minutes of that time on actually building a relationship and building community with your brand, your dispensary or brand, whatever it is, then we've done a good thing, right? Because making it purely transactional is a problem, right? I think that we want to have this purely transactional, and then we forget that the bud tender is the human aspect. I'll come back, just as you noted earlier, whether or not the bud tender did a good job, and I tip. Right, like I like a bud tender that does a good job, right? Because I understand you may not be making a lot, and this is a lot of times is a labor of love, right? So we don't want to make it harder on the current bud tenders or even those coming into the industry, right? Imagine being a new bud tender, right? You come in, right? You taking the classes or what have you, but there's still the act of, okay, I gotta recommend good strains, right? Or I'm gonna get known as the guy that don't ask me anything, right? So we're taking all this stuff into account, right? I think the human aspect is what ultimately this is designed to enhance, right? If they can spend more time building community, pumping your brand, giving out swag, stickers, whatever, right? That's where we win as an industry, right? I don't think we win on a purely transactional basis, but I digress.
No, 100%. There's a couple things to dive into there. And so, first of all, you're talking about the bud tender, excuse me, that doesn't know shit or whatever, doesn't know the terpenes or whatever. What if they have access to this little tool that's already connected to your their website and then said, hey, I'm the bud tender here. I need help with this, this, and this. And they could instantly get that. It's not like they have to not ignore the customer. Like, imagine you're the customer right in front of me. I can still type, I can still get this done, and I can still get the answer right in front of me, and I'll still be able to help them. And so that's an instant use case. And then you also were talking about, not making this all transactional. Well, you actually put your money where your mouth is here. And so I noticed you have a freemium model for your service. How does that work? Who qualifies? How do you sign up?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have less than 25 products, whether you're a dispensary, cannabis brand, or hemp, right? We've had some interest as of late from the hemp industry. You are able to use our tools at no cost, right? A limited version, obviously, right? But to take all the wraps off, right? We do ask that you upgrade. But for free, we offer 5 competitive research searches, right? Or the use of our AI to, do whatever you might want to do, whether it's create images, marketing campaigns. We even offer kind of a basic version of our growth engine. Right? You're not able to send out like emails, SMSs, but you can get recommendations on things that you can do to improve your operations as a brand or dispensary. So our goal is, even when you're signing up, we give you a competitive report that shows your price positioning for free, right? One of my goals was to be able to provide value enough so that folks would look at our tool and say, okay, if they're giving this away for free, right, let me look into it and see what the talk is about, right? Let me give this a shot. So, long before I tell this to all of our partners, when we first start doing business, long before I ever ask for a dime, right, you'll realize the value of not just myself, right, but our tools, right? And I meant that, right, from day one. Now, as an investor into us, you might look at that and say, well, that's a pretty strong claim to make, but I stand behind it, right? We don't want to be the company that comes in and doesn't really deliver on the promises that we set forth, which is why we've been slow walking this, right? And only bringing in certain partners that we're fairly sure that we can help, right? And limiting it to that, right? And then with the aim of rolling it out to the broader community.
Yeah, and so I've noticed lots of good points there. But one thing I also wanted to bring up, I noticed that you're also big into social equity and diversity, and also supporting minority-owned businesses. And you even actually have special equity licenses for certain companies. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're under the social equity umbrella, 50% off. So you get half off, and that's life. So if you're an MCBA member, M4MM, BIPOC, any of the equity organizations, or if you're not, but you can verify that you are equity owned, we do offer 50% off our tool, and that brings basically the entry level to get started down to $25, right? To go in and use our AI unlimited to do as much competitive research as your heart is content. Generate marketing campaigns, images, etc. So our commitment to the equity community is deep. It's strong, and they were the first folks to back us, right? To actually take their platform and say we'll get behind you guys and help you deliver, right? So that's my roots, and honestly, that's where my heart lies. But I love to work with anybody, right? My task, if you bring us on, is to be a fanatic about making you more money, right? If you win as a dispensary owner, if you win as a brand, right, we win, right? And that's kind of the sum of it, right? But for the equity community, we recognize some of the disadvantages that they face, right? Particularly around tech. But also around like licensing, raising money, right? We want to be, not an impediment to you being successful, right? We want to be more of a step, right? So if you're just coming out of the gate, one of our customers that I just onboarded a couple of days ago, they're scheduled to open up a dispensary out in New Jersey in 3 or 4 months. right? Because our tools are free, specifically our headless menu. This allowed her to get the website up, right? Basically, without having to wait around until month four, right? Now we can get it up right away. She can put, sample products, not selling anything yet, but at least we can get Google crawling her website, right? So I'm giving these
Yeah.
folks sound advice, right? And a lot of the stuff, a lot of the work I do it even pro bono, right? Mostly for the love, right? Because if you've just got your license, you're raising money, right? You don't necessarily have the time or the resources to go and hire a consultant, right, and hire an advisor, right? So I try to help where I can, specifically when it comes to the equity community.
Yeah, no, well, as you likely know, minority communities, blacks, Latinos, they're disproportionately charged and put into jail for, especially historically for, minor possession offenses, more so than the white community. And so, are these like the kind of people that that you usually
Oh
bring
yeah,
onto the program? Because that's awesome.
absolutely.
Because I know
Yeah,
one other person we had on the podcast, Devin Alexander. He built a shoot. I'm forgetting his brand name. I'm sorry, Devin. Shout out Devin Alexander. He was actually a social equity
really. I think it's really
applicant.
right.
Say that one more time.
Is it really
Rolling relief, I
early,
believe, something
really
like that.
there?
And
Yeah,
so he was charged with possession. I think it was like 5 grams, something ridiculous. Then all of a sudden he was published on national news, like being like this terrible person, like a monster or whatever. Bringing weed to the community or whatever the words they were used. Flip the script. 10 years later, he's actually one of these first social equity applicants. All of a sudden now he's got a big delivery business. I think that's fair, given that the trauma that he had to face,
yeah,
just being on national news. And so I did want to shout you out on that. Not everybody does that in the space, but I think it's a very necessary product to have. So
yeah.
big shout out there.
Appreciate it.
And so we've covered a lot of ground. Actually, there was one other thing I wanted to cover real quick. Also, and so what POS systems do you integrate with? We have Blaze, Flow Hub. Shout out to my partner Antonio Panella. Bloom is another good platform to look at. How does that work?
Yeah. So out the gate, we have our main integration that works out the gate is marijuana software. It's a little small POS out of Oklahoma. But we also have regular kind of, you provide an API key with Dutchy.
Yeah.
And now we just had a partner that has Flow Hub, and we're working on our Flow Hub integration. Hopefully, we'll be able to get a formal kind of official integration with Flow Hub from Cal and the team. But yeah, so any POS system you work with, we can integrate. You just need to give us your API key. And our team can build. As the product is in beta, we're still building out all of the POS systems. But we also have a partnership with Green Check that allows us to basically integrate with like over 40 POSs. The difference is that integration only allows us to receive data, right? What we really, in an ideal situation, we like to receive and send data. Right? Why is this important? Because if we can send data back, we can update your prices. We can do a lot, right? We can do live pricing. We can make sure that you maintain margins relative to whatever your competitors are doing, as opposed to just receiving data and then analyzing it, and then you yourself taking action on that, right? Works either way, right? But our approach is, we want to optimize the entire experience to the extent that we can.
Yeah, well, if you're on Dutchy and already integrating with Flow Hub, I think that's like 90% of the industry already. So, my partner Antonio Padella Bloom, they're starting to get up there too. And so maybe the longer term, you could look at integrating with a platform like that. But I was curious because I wanted to know, like, do you have to tap into your full e-commerce setup and everything, or is this something that also integrates with other platforms? And that's awesome. I'm glad you integrate with other platforms. So we've covered the gist of what I wanted to cover in this. What is it? How much does it cost? Or not necessarily how much does it cost, but that we'll put the pricing on the website just to respect you in case you want to change your prices, in a month or whatever. That we don't have this in the video, but it is in the hundreds when I was looking at it, per month. And so this is something very affordable, something that you can have on your dispensary, brand, website, whatever. Is there anything else that we're not covering about your product that you think we're missing the mark on how you separate yourself and are unique in this space?
Yeah, so I think that you kind of hit on most of the points. But what I really want to reiterate to folks is, as we bring this product to market, you won't need an email marketer anymore, right? You won't need an SMS individual to come in and write these messages, and they don't resonate anyway with your customer, right? So if you're paying 50, 60K a year for an email marketer, if you're paying, 40, 50, 70,000 for an SMS marketer, if you're paying some agency, triple, whatever figures of money, you'll be able to do this literally for pennies on a dollar, right? So this is good for the industry overall, right? You got a lot of folks here that maybe seek rent, right, and don't necessarily deliver on the values that they are supposed to. This kind of eliminates a lot of the fat, if you will, right? Now that's not to say go out and fire your team, right? But to be fair, right, if you have a marketing manager, right, if you have someone running your marketing, a lot of the tedious, the most pressing tasks that you have to do anyway, right, like segmenting your customers and figuring out how to get the messaging right, we'll do that for you, right? Our AI agents will do it and do it at scale. And anybody that wants to, challenge me on this, I'll argue that they'll do it better than the average marketer, right? Because look, one thing that I'll tell you, it's very hard to run SMS and email marketing campaigns at scale, right, where they actually reach the right people at the right time, right? So, we raised initially a small amount of money to build out our tool, and we put our money where our mouth is to do this, right? And all I'm doing, for anybody that's curious, right, my background is in exactly what I'm building out, right? Basically marketing automation. So this is not something that's foreign to me, right? This is something that over the course of my career, I've had to learn, right? And in all cases, I can tell you, without a team, it's very, very difficult to do this. And I'll give one example, right? You have customers that start out as infrequent shoppers, low spenders. But let's say over the 6 months that they've been dealing with you, they go from infrequent to frequent shoppers, high spender. But guess what? You're still sending them the discount message, right? So guess what I'm going to do? Oh, shit, 50% off today. I'll go and I'll spend 50. Now, just like that, you've killed your margins, right? So what you need is messaging that respects them across the entire customer journey. And that, my friend, it's difficult to do without AI agents. Very difficult to do. So I don't want to, crap on anybody or any of the folks that are in the space, but sometimes we got to speak a little truth, right? There's a reason why, agencies and different people come on and the same messages goes to all 5,000 of your customers, right? And then you get this 3-4% response rate. You're like, okay, right, that really didn't work like we thought, right? It's because it just doesn't resonate, right? So our goal is to help them get that on track, but to do it at scale without having to spend $100,000, quite frankly. So that's our spiel.
That is a great sales pitch. I would recommend this to anybody who's asking me about a good AI chatbot, or shall we say AI agent budtender. For any of my clients, this is a great product. I wanted to shout you out, Martez. Thanks for coming on, sharing what you got going on, what you're building. It's a great product. Definitely wish you all the success in the world. But to kind of wrap this up, I have a few different questions for you. Again, as I was telling you before, you don't have to answer these, but I think they're fun. But first things first, I'm curious to hear about the first time you smoked weed. Or maybe it wasn't smoking, maybe it was consuming, or how'd that work? What was the setting? What happened?
Yeah, high school, car, I would say 17. So I'll tell you who I was in the car with, and it might make you laugh, right? But me, Marcus Andrews, a close friend, Dwayne Wade,
no
right?
Shit,
Basketball. Stacy Brownlee. We were riding around in the car. Dwayne didn't hit it, right? I want to make sure I say that, right? Even back then, he was strictly athlete, but we were all athletes, but a little bit more edgier than others. But Yeah, it was a close friend's birthday, right? And we partake, man. And now to be that was my first time doing it like fully. Now to be fair, I do recall picking up little joints out my mom's ashtray right here and there as like a 7, 8 year old thinking they were cigarettes. But these weren't cigarettes, right? They weren't smelling cigarettes, right? So, but technically, right, 17, with a lot of my friends from high school that I grew up with, and it was magical, I'd say, because I look back now and I think where we all ended up feels great.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody else has a similar first time story like that. I've heard a lot. Nobody included the word Dwayne Wade, for example, in the car when I'm talking about their first. It's like what? It almost seems like it's not real, but I'll take your word for it, man. I have no reason not
Yeah,
to
man.
trust you.
Maybe I'll put a picture out there and show some folks from high school us taking pictures, man. We had back then. I'll show my age again, right? I was graduated in 2000. If you recall, like that was a very clicky type time, right? So everybody had like cliques and friends, right? And we called ourselves the Godfathers, right? But what we really were the jocks, right? We played football, basketball, track. That would be the equivalent, right, of what the average people would call, right? But yeah, we were called the Godfathers, man. But all in good fun, right? We played ball, I was in NIA club, student government, right? So we were the cool kids, but smart, right? Occasionally I did partake. But yeah, it started when I was 17, man. Interesting.
Yeah, good story, man. So these days, you're in your mid 40s. I think you said. We don't need to shout that out, but anyways, you're not a 17-year-old anymore. You've come a long way, and so when you do partake these days, what's your favorite product and means of consumption?
Good question. Well, I do a lot of CBD salves. Anybody that knows me, I had a major injury about 2 or 3 years ago. But CBD hemp salves, right? That's kind of like my go-to for pain relief. But on the cannabis side, I'd say smoking. I'm old school in that way, man. Occasionally, I'll do like some sort of donut where it's infused.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm like a runts guy. Um, you know, like a good pre-roll. But yeah, I mostly smoke these days.
Yeah, there
No
you go.
dabbing. I don't. I rarely dab and do all that other stuff.
Yeah, everybody has their own little preferences. That's why I love asking that question. But I'm also a joints guy. But at the same time, like you have to have a good set and setting to do it. And if you live in an apartment that's frowns upon smoking, for example, you have to get a little bit more creative. But anyways, putting that aside, let's start to wrap this up. But I'm curious, Martez, you've been in this industry for a while. You've been in marketing for a while. You study kind of waves of marketing and markets and that sort of stuff. And I'm curious what you think, seeing what you see in the next 5 years or so. Are we going to have full legalization of cannabis? Are we going to, ban the farm bill? Are we going to cut back on hemp? What do you see happening in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I don't see full legalization. Right, I see these states being as like little factions and fiefdoms, kind of like unto themselves. Right, so there's power there, right, and not having to worry about the federal kind of side of things. Right, so they don't have much of an incentive to drive it forward. Right, so that's what I would expect on the legalization side. I'm sorry, your other question?
Just asking what you think is going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years, essentially.
Yeah. So I mean, but beyond the legalization not happening, I would expect that at the rate that we're going, right, MSOs will continue to dominate. Right, to be fair, they'll probably use regulatory capture to do a lot of this stuff. I see hemp being, essentially like outlaw, right? But it won't go away, right? Because you can still order it online, right?
Yeah.
I was at an MCDA equity tour when they came to Chicago, and one of the conversations I had with some of the folks was, if they're banning hemp in a certain locality, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that I, as a citizen that lives in that locality, I can't order it online, for example, right? It just means that you can't buy it at the gas station or wherever you bought it at, right? But the last I checked, right, my Civics, if it holds correct still, we have the interstate commerce clause, right, which cannot restrict commerce across state lines, right? So I expect those issues to be litigated, right, by lawyers that are much smarter than I. But in the short term, we have hemp guys that are signing up using our platform, right? And they're looking at it like, I can sell online too, right? I don't have to necessarily be limited to this particular geographic region. So I expect more fragmentation across the stack. But more importantly, I also expect a lot of people that are on the legal side of things and going into dispensaries. I think that they're going to start discovering some of these other products on the hemp side. If nothing else, because the price of the cannabis when you add in the taxes is just too expensive relative to some of the other alternatives, right? Whether it be, buying it underground from a legacy guy or, going to the smoke shop and buying it, right? So a lot of headwinds for cannabis. And, if you're an independent operator, being able to get at your data and understanding it, more importantly, is going to be key, right? Because there can be no more, I'll look up the street and see how this dispensary prices their products and then I'll base mine, right? You can't do that, right? We have to have hard data, right? To and I'm looking at Detroit when I say that, right? We have to have hard data to help inform how we price, especially in the age of, in case of Michigan, 24% tax, right? Where's the price discovery there, right? It's going to be critical as we head into the new year, right? And I think that BakeBot is one of the better tools that's positioned to take advantage of that. If I may, I want to shout out one individual that's been kind of key to our journey, and that's Vib with Can Menus. I don't know if you're familiar with Vib, but he's...
No. Maybe I should reach out and have him on the podcast too.
Absolutely reach out to Vib. Really great guy. He and Can Menus provides the backbone of our data. So a lot of our, dispensary menus and whatnot, Can Menus has been instrumental, right, in helping us bring this product to fruition. So I'll be remiss not to mention Bib and the crew. Such a pleasure to work with.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Martez. I was just going to write that down. I'm just realizing that I'm screen recording here, and so I'll write down the Can Menus and reach out to them. But thank you so much for coming on here. After what I initially thought this product was going to be, and then after being on this call and realizing what it really is, my mind switched from A to B, essentially, day to night. This is a really great product, and I wanted to shout you out for the great work that you're doing on multiple different fronts. And thank you for coming on. I'll make sure to leave, your booking link, your website, all that stuff in the description here. And so if you are interested learning more about BakeBot.ai, definitely reach out either via website, LinkedIn, whatever. But thank you so much, Martez, for coming on the show. And wish you the best. And then let's look out for some other ways we can collab in the future. But thanks
Absolutely. Again. Appreciate that, my friend. Enjoy your day.
Hey, Sam here. Thanks again for listening to the GDM podcast. So we do websites and SEO for cannabis brands and operators, and we do things a little bit differently here at GDM where we can promise results within weeks rather than months. And so if you're looking to sell more ounces, bongs, and other premium products, start selling some more weed, get in touch with us at Green Dispensary Marketing to learn more. Thanks again for listening and hope you have a great day.